later on this afternoon. So we now move on to the second of our three panels. We are going to be joined by 4 former officers and a reservist officer who are going to discuss their experience of transition and provide some of their advice and the benefit of their experience. Firstly, we're going to be joined by Andrew Clarke of Assured Cyber Protection. We're also joined by Tom Huckle from Markley Associates, Oliver Holland from Alexandra Mann and the reservist officer, Francis Heritage from JP Morgan, Steve Black, who's a former Army officer. Good afternoon, all. Can I just ask you just to quickly introduce yourself, a short couple of lines just to introduce yourself to the audience. Andrew, can I start with you?
Yeah, good afternoon. Hi, I'm Andrew Clarke. I spent 20 years almost in the military, commissioned to the Royal Artillery in 1995, left just short of 2015. And I went straight into a cybersecurity company and helped co-found it with a couple of other guys, and have been with that same company ever since. Here now in 2021, looking to really scale the business much larger than it has been over the last couple of years. And with COVID, it's been a very difficult time, but that's where I find myself now after 20 years. The 20 years I spent were in the Royal Artillery. I had several different tours through different regimental duty. I was an SO2 in the DCBMA, which is the Department for Cyber Battlespace Management. And I ran the Defence's Internet Presence, which is probably why I ended up in a role of cybersecurity. I also did a master's degree in Information Management and Technology after Staff College. Several other jobs at the SO2 level, and then culminating in a job in Oman as a training officer before I left and went straight into a job post that as a advisor to the Minister for National Security in Bermuda, where I was there for almost 3 years before joining ACP as initially as the Chief Operating Officer, or SVP for delivery, morphing into the Chief Operating Officer, and only recently, probably in the last 12 months, I've become the Chief Strategy Officer here.
That's great, thank you. Tom, if you could just introduce yourself, please.
Yep, sure. Very quickly then, I spent 8 years in the Royal Marines as an officer, specialised as a mountain leader, and I didn't have a cyber background. I taught myself in my last couple of years in the roles, and from there I managed to secure a job with Barclays Bank in their cyber operations team, and from there I've had a few different cyber roles. I think most notably is Crucial Academy, which I helped build and deliver, and where I am now is Director of Consulting at Markley Associates, who specialise in cyber incident response and digital forensics.
Fantastic, thank you, Tom. Ollie, if you could just introduce yourself.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, Ollie Holland. I'm a senior manager for a talent acquisition and talent management firm called Alexandra Mann Solutions, AMS. I'm contracted out to Rolls-Royce as my client. I've been there just for over 2 years, and I lead on diversity and inclusion and recruitment marketing for a section of Rolls-Royce business. Outside of that, I'm a reservist in the Navy.
Thank you very much. Francis.
Hi, good afternoon. Francis Heritage. I'm an intern at JP Morgan in London, currently working in the part of the investment bank known as wholesale payments, helping to clear currency payments between companies and individuals around the world. I recently left the Royal Navy after just over 12.5 years as a warfare officer, finishing up as a PWO, although my final job was doing MACA, so military assistance in times of crisis. Initially one of the 24 permanent members of staff, which quickly became 300 last year. So if you're on this call and you were delivering PPE towards the back end of 2020, that's probably something to do with me, for which I apologise. But I suspect I'm the member of the panel who's most recently left the armed forces. So looking forward to pass on what I've learned to anyone else on the call today.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Steve.
Hi there, good afternoon. Steve Black, serving Army officer, 20 years, Royal Engineer by background. I'm a few months into my resettlement now, and I'm just here to espouse the virtues of the OA, who have been fantastic, and I'm hopefully on the cusp of landing something with a defence prime.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. So this is your chance to ask our panel some questions about their experience of transitioning out of the military. As before, type any questions that you've got into the Q&A box, and I'll ask them on your behalf. So just to kick us off, then we have some prepared questions, and first one we have is we've had many questions around pitching yourself, and we've heard lots of our speakers talking about how to pitch yourself and finding your fit within an organization. But would you be able to share some advice on how you found your fit within the business, especially when looking for your first role, and how did you know what level of seniority you were suited to? Tom, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. And so in terms of finding the fit, it's not an easy thing, and I understand it, because you can think that, especially in cyber, there's lots of different roles that you can do, and you don't know which one that maybe that you'd find best fit in terms of your strengths and weaknesses. And it took me a good 6 months of kind of like looking through and networking and talking to different people within the industry to kind of understand what I found interesting. And I think that's the important thing in cyber. You've got to find what's interesting. Don't go down the route of maybe what's the most the one that's pitched out there the most, and you see in like movies, which is a lot of people see the penetration testing kind of route as the way to go. But exactly, there's a fantastic variation of roles out there that you can do that doesn't require you to have that technical know-how, which I think is quite an important one. In terms of then, I received some very good advice in terms of which kind of seniority do you want to go to. So I initially focused at Barclays Bank, and I managed to get a internship there. I spoke to one of the, he had been in the military as well, but he had been working at the bank for a couple of years. And he said that in terms of how you pitch yourself, he was like, don't be afraid, especially like you said, you're an officer, of going in at that kind of senior management level, because if you go in there, especially like in cyber, the pressure will be on you from day one, and you'll be front of house. And so you'll be expected to perform. He's like, you can take a step back. And for example, the difference between a VP role or an AVP role, like vice president or assistant vice president, for example, he's like, I jumped in at AVP, which was actually, I was part of a team. I didn't have any management duties, but it allowed me to learn the role and learn the ropes of how, for example, it works out here in the private sector, which is a little bit different. And you get a lot more rope. And then he said, after a year, I kind of knew what I was doing, and I was up there. I got promoted into the next role, into VP. And so it's kind of what you feel like. That was a bit of advice, and that's exactly the route that I took into jumping into Barclays. So I jumped into an AVP role. I did that for a year, and then I jumped up into a management position the following one.
Steve, obviously your experience is extremely recent in terms of leaving the military and looking to pitch yourself at organisations. Have you got any advice about how you pitched yourself at the right level, or how you assessed your level at an organisation for organisations?
Yeah, I think I'll tell it both ways, really. Not least what's just already been said there about having to, to take a step back, to take a couple of steps forward, and that's what I'm doing now. If I'm fortunate enough, not to tempt fate, to land this post that I'm currently going through with one of the defence primes, I'm actually taking a step back, but that is to unlock a whole load of potential, I hope, in taking a couple of steps forward. And so that's absolutely the norm. And looking at your KSC and applying it to the opportunities that they have means that in some cases you do need to take a step back to take a couple of steps forward, because you're not expected to know it all, and you're certainly not going to bring it all. So there's a bit of a compromise to be had there. But also, in another job that I was successful to go forward for, it was in a construction industry, and they were quite glad just to take me on board at pretty much a similar level that I'm leaving the military with now. And then that was to obviously then have some potential in that role as well, and kind of expand in the managerial responsibility that came with it. So I've seen it both ways. I would probably just end by saying that it's all really a negotiation with you and your potential employer. And sometimes those rules just aren't aren't there. They're not visible, and hopefully, again, not to tempt fate, but with this contractor that I'm going to go on and take a post for, they're creating a position for me. So I'm feeling incredibly fortunate in that way. So it's not a simple answer, forgive me. But you know, I've seen one where it's predominantly been set through negotiation and talking with your future employer to find that right fit.
Fantastic, thank you. Francis, have you got any thoughts on that question?
I think sort of Tom and Stephen have hit it on the head, which is, you know, you use your network to understand what each role actually needs. And there is no risk in going in slightly below than you might think, because actually, unlike the military, you don't need to be in a certain grade for a certain period of time before you can be considered for promotion, most often. And any business worth its salt will want to promote talent as quickly as possible. So one of the reasons I went for the internship that I did was it would give me a network, and it would give me the opportunity to see what different roles actually required. And so in some ways, I sort of delegated that initial step to the hiring team, because I was essentially starting off as an intern. But I think like the guy said there, that there is no issue with going in slightly lower than you think, because you take a lot of pressure off yourself. And if the business is a good one, it will recognise your talent anyway and promote you without making you do some sort of minimal time in post anyway.
And I think that's a really good point. Thank you. And Andrew, any final thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I suppose. Look, you don't undersell yourself is what I would say, but don't also over-egg it. You've got to look at the market and see what's going on. I think, to be honest, as to know where you can go in. Some people have said you don't expect to go in at the salary you left on. I think that's sometimes quite damaging, because it lowers people's expectations, but at the same time, it manages them. So I think, for me, it's a little bit of a different journey. You know, I co-founded the company when I left. I'd gone into a job in Bermuda, which was paying a significant salary, more than I'd come out on. So I had the ability to go to the market with what I was earning as opposed to what grade I was. And I think what I would say on this is that most people you go in, salaries, grades from the military are public knowledge. So people know what you've left the military on. And they sometimes use that as a yardstick to measure where you might come into the business. But from what Francis, Tom, and Steve said earlier, if you are worth your salt, you will progress through the grades, and you will be able to promote quickly. So don't, because you're being offered a lesser role or one that's at a lesser salary than you expected, turn it down. Because just weigh it up. If it's a job you want to be in and you're going to enjoy yourself doing it, and you know you're going to be able to sell yourself in that role, then you will promote quickly. We as military officers do offer a significant amount to organisations which often aren't readily acknowledged when you're going to interview, for example.
Fantastic. I think that's a good point. A good place to leave that question. Ollie, I want to come to you for the next question first. I think, as a recruiter or somebody working for a recruitment agency, it'd be really great to get your insight on this. We know that our service, when we first leave the military, understanding how best to transfer our military skills and experiences into civilian speak is a challenge. Have you got any advice from a recruiter's perspective how you might do that?
Yeah, I think there's a fair bit of sort of grey aspect to navigate on that, and one of the things I'd really recommend anyone doing is putting their CV, when they've got a draft of a CV, you can have plenty going on at the same time as you transition, but a draft of the CV in front of the nose of someone who doesn't have a background in the military and who hasn't served or doesn't know anything about potentially the things you've been doing. And really ask them to feed back to you on what they think some of the terms mean, and you can then go left or right of arc as to what is actually true versus what is potentially incorrect or needs some correction. And it's a real fact that when someone transitions and they're talking to various different organisations about joining them for a job or a second career, you're going to talk to people who don't have a military background, and a lot of them will be fascinated to hear DITs and things, you can tell them, but equally, you've got to understand that the language is different, terminologies are different. Even in Rolls-Royce, client for the last few years, they love an acronym, and as we do in defence, but it is a different culture and it's a different language that's said. So just the expectation that things are going to be different, I think, is quite key. But allowing someone who is removed from the armed forces community to feedback on your CV is really critical. It just provides a second opinion on where you might meet some barriers along the way.
Fantastic. And if we go around the panel then, so Francis, if have you got any thoughts about how you approached positioning your CV when you left?
Well, I guess the first thing is, like any good staff officer, I stole the CV from someone else that I knew worked already, and then rejigged it for myself. So if anybody on the call, and I appreciate there's quite a few people, wants to reach out to me and take mine afterwards, I'd be more than happy to share it. It was a Queen's Royal Answers. It worked for him. It's worked for me, not only in terms of the structure, but I think, like was just said there, with regards to altering the language. The second and final thing, and again, talking about the internship again, one of the sort of advantages of a sort of structured military internship is the fact that you're probably being assessed by veterans who know what they're looking for. And if you are very, very worried about that initial step, you perhaps won't have to tailor it as much. So you'll have people looking at, from a military internship perspective, who know what you mean when you say, you know, you can lead a section attack, and transfer that into the soft skills it is. So that can take some of the risk out of it. Of course, it also means you can't pull them all over their eyes. So that's probably the second and final thing I'd say there.
Fantastic, thank you. And Andrew, yourself?
Well, look, in my first iteration of my CV, I had, it was quite verbose, and then I spent probably weeks and months crafting it. Probably went through about 30 or 40 different iterations. I did employ an expert to look at it and put their bent on it, but I got it back. And actually, do you know what? Sometimes it doesn't always help to get a professional view from someone that says they're a CV writer. So if you are going to invite a CV writer to help you write your CV, do some research on who that person is, because all they're doing is regurgitating your words into the same document, and sometimes you find you spend a lot of money on it. So find someone that's already used their CV writer that worked for them, because I think there is an art to translating what is military speak into a CV that's going to work for a civilian organisation.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really good point. There are lots of people out there who will advertise and say that they can write your CV, but I think your point about them regurgitating their own words is a fantastic one. Tom, what about yourself? I mean, in your experience, were there any sort of how did civilian employers receive your CV? Were there any challenges when they saw your CV? Did they have to come back to you on any of the terms or anything that you used?
Yeah, I mean, CV, just like Andrew said, I think I counted at the end of when I finally managed to get employment, 40, 50 different kind of variations. And unfortunately, it is a bit of a slog, and you've just got to, especially when you've gone through your first 15 or so, and you're like, oh, maybe I'll just put this one in again, it'll be fine. Don't, just put the effort in every single time, because despite you having to make all the different, the same effort every time, the people who's receiving your CV, it'll be the first time that they look at it. So they wouldn't have had to go through that kind of, oh, now this is again the 15th time I've had to amend it. It's worth it. The tip that I will send across now is, if you're moving, because I didn't have any experience in cybersecurity, especially from my military time. But what I did have was skill sets. Is I had gone on and managed to get like CompTIAs, Network Plus, Security Plus, CYSA, whilst in the time in the military. So what I did is I changed my CV from a timeline CV into a functional CV. So that means that rather than doing the timeline was I did all these kind of roles in the military, I changed it into, well, these are the skills that I pulled out from my military career, and these are the qualifications that I've got. And it is simply a case of trying to get through that initial CV shift that is normally a HR person who doesn't have an understanding about what cyber is. And they may have just been told, look for these qualifications and maybe a bit of experience or these certain skill sets to get you through. So it's always worth thinking of what type of CV would probably get you through that first bit. Look at the job description if they're looking for certain qualifications and that, and because that's how they're probably going to get through. And if you really want to get that chance to get through to the next stage, do that little bit of homework and try and find out who the hiring person is. Try and maybe contact them just to go and just build some sort of rapport and relationship. And it's much more likely if they can see those kind of interpersonal skills, communication, leadership and confidence, that they'll go, oh yeah, get that CV through because I spoke to that person, or someone gave me a recommendation of that person and they seem great. And that's, you've got to do it, not just rely on the CV. You've got to kind of do that extra little bit, which normally works and gets you through to an interview.
Yeah, and actually, a really good point. I think realizing that the CV is the last stage rather than the first stage of the application process is a really good point. Along with realizing that there are differences, different types of CVs out there, and the chronological CV that we've all got used to isn't the only option out there. Steve, what about yourself? Again, recently you've been putting your CV together in order to secure a role. How have you approached that?
Yeah, so everything that's just been said is absolutely bang on. I think one of the best bits of advice that I got right at the start was looking for a full-time job is a full-time job, and keeping that CV alive and changing it time in and time out. You can't afford to be lazy. And I just want to kind of mention specifically the OA, and particularly Fiona, if she's listening. That was a fantastic starter for 10. When you kind of throw something together, you think it looks like a CV, and then you put it through the Officers Association. They were just fantastic. But also CTP, and the CTP workshop was also very good in helping to pull something together. But yeah, you can't really underestimate the amount of effort that it needs just to stay on top of that CV. And I'll probably end by saying that, for a particular job, there was one that I was going for back to that construction prime I was talking about. And that spoke to 2 specific years that I had as a manager in a particular area of my career in the Royal Engineers. And I heavily concentrated on that particular area of the CV. So I think it's just finding the vacancy that you're going for, seeing where that fit in the myriad of jobs that you've had in your Army career or in your career in the Navy or Air Force, and then kind of amplifying that and bringing that through in the CV. But absolutely, looking for a job is a full-time job.
Fantastic. And you've also done my job for me. I was just about to mention that the OA have a team of career consultants, and one of their specialisms is being able to review CVs. And if you are looking for some feedback on your CV, then book a CV review with Lisa or Fiona. And as I said earlier on, I know that the feedback from employers and from other officers who've been through the process, and Steve himself, is always really, really positive.
Chris, sorry, can I just add something
Yeah,
to that as well? Because I think that sometimes everyone thinks the CV is the be all and end all, and it depends what job you're going for and how you've been asked to apply for it. So some will just want a CV and nothing else. Those that want a covering letter, that is your opportunity to really show and bring out the bits in your CV that are going to be relevant to the role. So don't underestimate the power of that covering letter, and make sure you craft your CV with outcome-based or outcomes rather than, I did this, I did that. Show what you actually did. And it's very difficult in some respects, because I know that metrics in the civilian world are not the same as they are in the civilian world. So you've got to try and work out what they're looking for and try and articulate those in a civilian way, and then flesh it out in the covering letter if you should get the opportunity.
Fantastic, and really, really good point there, Andrew. So thank you very much for jumping in there. Just a quick reminder: if you've got any questions, type them into the Q&A box. We can ask them on your behalf. This is an opportunity to get some of those questions that have perhaps been burning in the back of your mind asked from people who've been through the same experience that you're going through at the moment. Our next question then is perhaps slightly different, because our next question is perhaps looking forward rather than looking back. So we've obviously got people in the audience who are not actively going through resettlement now. but they're already in civilian employment. I mean, how have you found progression through your organisation, through your role, through the organisations you work for? And have you got any tips for approaching promotion within your organisation? And also, just to add to that, any tips around planning your career, planning what comes next for you? Who would like to take that forward first?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in to start it off. I think it's one of those. Once you get into a cybersecurity, I mean, this is just from my experience. Once you get into a cybersecurity job, you'll find that your inbox, especially in LinkedIn, becomes quite busy in terms of recruiters. And I see Ollie smiling there a little bit because once you get a couple of years of experience in the field, there isn't because I'm going through the process with the company at the minute in terms of like hiring and trying to find good talent. And I can tell you now, it is not about trying to find the most technically gifted people in the world in cybersecurity. What we're trying to find is a combination of people who have the technical understanding, not necessarily very completely in depth technically wise, maybe looking at certain aspects. Maybe they have a background in threat intelligence analyst, or they're a pen tester, or they do security auditing and they understand risk. But what really makes a candidate well is that kind of communication skills, the leadership, and those kind of soft skills as well. If you can combine both of those with a couple of years of experience in cyber, you'll find it very rewarding, and also not an easy, but you'll be able to plot your course a lot easier. And I think, like I said at the start, you need to spend some time yourself thinking about where you want to be. And it's that classic question of where do you want to be in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? But if you want to be, for example, a CISO in 10 years' time, then there is a particular route that you need to be able to have in terms of understanding certain technical aspects of risk, understanding policy, process, data protection, ISO, and maybe a flourish of certain defensive skill sets as well, and maybe also a bit of red team, but maybe not much on the technical side. But if you want to be head of security testing in NCC, for example, you need to go down the heavy technical route and go and do all the pen testing, go and get the CREST qualifications or the other kind of competing ones, and then work your way up that way. So there are definite paths for you to try to plot, and there are some really good kind of, in terms of if you want to follow like the qualification kind of routes, there are some good little diagrams out there that tell you what to do at certain areas. But also, to kind of throw this into the mix, qualifications from my experience are good at the start of your career to get your foot into the door, or if you do certain specializations, you can follow them. But after a certain period of time, especially when you move up into more managerial levels, they don't become as important, and it's more the experience that you've had in industry which is valued, and that you can bring to the table as well. So don't think it's the be all end all, which people do get wrapped up with qualifications. They can help at the beginning, but as you build through your career, they're not necessarily as important. And that's just from my opinion and what I look for as well. All right, I think I'll stop there and let someone else chime in.
No worries. Ollie, have you got any thoughts on that and around how to plan your career and approaching promotion within a civilian organisation?
Yeah, I think this is where mentoring can play a really, really key role. And I think, the military were pretty good at it from personal experience, and same within the civilian environment with the different consulting firms that I worked with for the last decade or so, is seek out a mentor within your existing organisation, if appropriate, or within another organisation. You might have worked with them before, you might have a relationship with them, or perhaps over time you can organically grow a relationship that could then turn into a mentor-mentee relationship. I think certainly having someone that you can bounce ideas off and with, that is one step or two steps removed from your current career track is pretty useful. Just the diversity of thought that can go into that conversation. I'd also understand, just on my own experience with AMS, is understanding the type of work that we're doing at the moment and we've got in the pipeline. So with bringing in various different logos across the year and putting in bids for client this and client that, if you can keep an eye on what the pipeline looks like and what potential clients are coming in, then that for me, shapes some of the decisions around, perhaps I'm interested in working with this organisation, or I'm interested in working in a particular industry. So staying in touch with, this is a very kind of consulting example, but if you stay in touch with the sales teams and the business development specialists and the like who lead on those types of activities, then you've got an idea of what is coming down and what's going to resonate with you, where it's going to give you energy and get interested, or perhaps not. So I think keeping an eye on what's coming down the pipeline and pairing that with a mentor relationship goes down well.
Fantastic, thank you. And Andrew, any thoughts from yourself on career planning?
Yeah, I think, look, you can, depending on what sort of an organisation you join, there will be some that will look after your career for you because they want you to hit all the different targets. I suppose it depends what age you are, depends when you leave, depends what qualifications you already come with. But there's only one person that will really, really look after your own career progression, and that's you. And so a lot of the time, I spend my spare time reading about the next best thing in cyber, for example, or how I'm going to stay ahead of the game. And I think if you want to progress outside of the military, where you're not on a sort of a churn, you have to add value, and that value doesn't just drop on your doorstep. It means you have to work for it. So whatever you do, covering your own sort of career progression is the only real way that you're going to get through and get promoted in the roles that you want to get promoted into.
That's a good point. So Francis and Stephen, I sort of purposely kept you separate just because of where you are in your career, and just wondering how you've approached your plans, your career plans going forward now, and if there's anything that you've done specifically about approaching your future career.
Yeah, I'll go first. Yeah, I'll keep it short. So rather fortuitous. So I'm leaving in a capability and acquisition post in Army headquarters, and so quite fortuitous in that I was kind of geography first and then job. I've been married and accompanied for quite a while, and I'm trying to get back to Northern Ireland. And so fortuitous in that there was a defence prime that was able to allow me to do both. So play into my KSE that I'm taking with me as I leave the Army, but also give me an opportunity to work from home and see more of the family, which has just been great. So I've been very much geography first and job to follow. And I'll probably end by saying, though, that I kind of looked at the lateral movement across the industry. So if I'm fortunate enough to get this job with the defence prime, I understand that there are a number of other defence primes, and either small to medium, that are out there as well. And so I realized that I've got a little bit of career lateral movement if I need it. But that's really been my thoughts so far. I kind of want to play to the KSE because I think that I can still maintain a kind of financial reward package in there that I would find acceptable. But I understand and would be really open to comment and come back that if I was to take my KSE down to its most basic level, although it would open up more opportunities in more different sectors outside of defence, I just wonder what the compromise to a financial reward would be. And all those factors all just played right through my head whenever I was out there job hunting.
Fantastic. And finally, Francis, you're on your internship, and just what have you done in terms of planning your career? What comes next for you?
So I think you just got to have an understanding that there's sort of 4 things you're trying to do. So firstly, understand where you want to go now as you leave, or as you've just left. Secondly, understand where you want to go next. And so Ollie pointed out the importance of understanding maybe the strategy of the company you're in. Do they plans to grow? Because that might make it easier. And then obviously your own understanding of what it is you enjoy. So talking about taking control of your own sort of destiny in that respect. You no longer have somebody in Glasgow or West Battery telling you where to go next or what jobs you need to go to get promoted. You need to understand that sort of yourself. Once you've understood point 2 of where you want to go next, step 3 is navigating a route to get there. And that's where Ollie spoke about mentorship. And again, one of the advantages of a formal program like the one I'm on is that I have a mentor. What I don't have is a sponsor, which is somebody slightly different. So that's something I'm working on at the moment. And then the final point is sort of to network in order to make that sort of happen. So, you know, taking control of your own career, you can be as good as you want, but if nobody knows about it, there's no real point. So I hold my hand up and say I'm still very much at point one, but in terms of sort of trying to understand where I want to be now, but in terms of getting to where you want to get to next, what everyone else has said in terms of controlling your own career, networking, getting a mentor is all equally valid. So I'm doing those things at the moment to try and take that next step.
Fantastic. So we're moving into sort of the last 5 minutes of the panel now. So and there's a couple of questions that I really want to get through. The first one is just about learning credits and training qualifications. It's a subject that comes up all the time. I just wonder if there's any courses that you've undertaken with your learning credits that you would particularly recommend, or conversely that you would particularly turn around and not recommend that people that people took. Is anybody got any thoughts on that?
If I could sort of very quickly, so yeah. Remember you have your standard learning credits as well. So if you go on places like read.co.uk, a lot of exams which you can take online, like Prince2, you can do them with your ELCs, but you'll probably find it's much more cost effective to do it with your SLCs, because you can do them all online for the fraction of a cost and keep your ELC for something else. In terms of the one thing so far I have spent my ELC on, the Alliance Manchester Business course, I found to be particularly helpful. And bear in mind, a lot of online courses might offer you those courses for free as well. And I think this is where Tom will probably plug Crucial Academy quite hard.
Tom, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's in, from my perspective and my background, if it is information security or cyber security you're interested in, the ones there that to focus on are the CompTIA ones. And there are some really good ones in resettlement at the minute down in Aldershot. They're the Network Plus and Security Plus. They normally do them bundled together. But for anyone that I look at in terms of CV wise, if it's a junior role, I look to see if they've got those two qualifications straight away. And the reason for it is they show that they've got a really good fundamental understanding of the beginnings of cyber and information security. Because I can only answer from a cyber perspective. But after that, if you want to go and look at other qualifications, Crest is very good, and that they've split their qualifications out into terms of different kind of roles as well. So if you want to go down the pen testing route, threat intelligence, incident response, they've all got their own kind of like roles and routes that you can go up from practitioner level all the way up to more experienced. Or CompTIA also has different routes if you want to go and do security architecture and cloud, which is very kind of popular at the minute, or if you want to go down the more kind of pen testing or cyber analyst, they've got another route down there as well. So yeah, that's essentially what I recommend, because I did that, and then also I taught it at Crucial Academy when I was there running that.
Fantastic, thank you. Stephen, any thoughts about how, or any stories from how you've used your ELCs?
No, just a top tip that I was given, which is just don't rush it. Because people feel that once they hit the beginning of their resettlement that they need to start getting after these courses. And it kind of comes back to the previous question about understanding what it is that you want to get after. And if you're not that way inclined and you honestly don't know what you're going to get after, then don't rush it. As I understand it, the grant is over your head for quite a long time. So you've got plenty of time to work it out and kind of hone in those courses like the ones that Tom's just mentioned. A fantastic example of how you can pinpoint those courses for the field that you want to go into once you know the field that you want to go into. But I think right now I don't really feel the need to rush into that just yet. And once I absolutely know where it is that I want to focus in on, then I can spend that money appropriately, which kind of leads me on to my last point. I think that it's an unspoken USP within some of the interviews that you can bring as a veteran. And what I mean by that is that you'll be stepping in to an interview situation with an absolute unique selling point over and above your civilian competition by saying that you've got £7,500 left to spend on dedicated courses in order to specialise, and that's £7,500 that your future potential employer doesn't have to spend. And therefore, I see that as a way of making yourself more attractive in any given interview situation.
That's an interesting point. Andrew, what about yourself? Any points around or any thoughts around using learning credits?
That was a really good point, by the way, Sue. I was about to say, look, sometimes your employer won't give you the time to spend your ELCs. Certainly, I've been trying to spend my final one that I've got since I started this particular job. That's not to say I won't use it, and I think they are valid now. They've been extended. They are valid for 10 years post leaving, and please check that out. But I think it's just been extended to 10 years, so there's a long time for you to use it. And maybe you won't need it in your first couple of jobs, or your first job, or the job you have when you leave, and will take you until retirement. But it's always good to have in your back pocket. And I'm not plugging the reserves here, but I became a reservist afterwards. And when you are reserve, you still have access to these SLCs, which is a really good low-level way of getting trained in areas that you can do online courses, etc. And you get up to 80% paid every year for that. So that's another really good thing to do if you're at a loose end and you want to join the reserves. I know that they're very pleased to have people leaving join the reserves, so that's something that you should bear in mind. I think when it comes down to spending your money versus the company's money, they're always up for that, for sure.
Fantastic. So just looking at the time now, we've got to quarter screen now, so we've got to the end of the session. I can just quickly go through the panel though, and just get any final thoughts, any tips that you might have for our audience before we close off. Ollie, if I start with you.
Yeah, it's just build on the last one, and conversely to the advice given versus spending your ELC appropriately versus spending it inappropriately. How often in your life do you get $7.5 grand to kind of do whatever you want with from a learning and development perspective? And I would say, if you're interested in triathlon coaching or nutrition or being a kayak instructor, whatever, then there's courses out there that you can go and do and spend some of your ELC towards, then why not? You've got the cash, you've potentially got some of the time during your resettlement period to be able to do it. And I would say consider broader options. Obviously, the logical and rational view is to invest that in your professional development, but it's 7.5K, which is a lot of cash to spend on your own development. So there's other options out there. Controversial views for some.
You're not the first person I know who said it. Tom, you're next on my screen. So if I come to you next.
Yeah, cool. I mean, two things I'll end on is network. In terms of it, that's probably the most likely chance you're going to get in terms of getting either through the door into an interview or even getting the job as a result. The more you can do, the better. It will grow that kind of network that you'll have then for the rest of your kind of business career. And in terms of, again, when you come to the end of the reassessment, you've got that really tricky period of the last 3 months where that's where the time pressure comes in to try and secure something, or at least start all the process, because that's again the most likely time that someone's going to look at you to then be able to take you on. All I would say there is have a mixture of companies that you aim for. If you go for the big companies, like the big consulting it can take 2 to 3 months until you get through the door. Alternatively, if you go to some of the smaller companies, there would be a lot more agile in their hiring, and you may find that you'll be able to get an offer within a month or maybe even a few weeks if you catch them just at the right time. It means if you don't just focus on the big ones, you could get to the end of that 3 months and all your answers come back negative. Whereas actually, you could go and have a selection of companies, get an offer from one of them. You could sit on that for a couple of weeks while you wait for the other to come through. It just gives you that bit more protection.
Excellent, thank you. Francis, you're next on my screen.
So just to reiterate that sort of networking is the holy grail that can probably answer quite a lot of questions. So if you don't know what to do, you can bounce ideas off people. If you do know what to do, you can find out more about sort of the company or the job you're interested in at sort of zero cost to you. So if you don't think you have a network, you are wrong, because the armed forces or veterans are pretty much everywhere. I think most of us would be kind enough to share our time with other people following on behind us. The Officers Association have a network. And again, so if people want to look me up on LinkedIn, I'd be more than happy to talk about my experience so far and share my CV if needed. I think all that those of us being contacted would ask is, have an idea of what you want to talk about, and we'll be more than happy to help you, because it can give you so many options and ideas when you're taking that first step.
That's great, thank you. Stephen, final thoughts from yourself?
So I think networking would have been mine, but it's been well stolen. I think I'm probably just going to say keep the faith, really. We're used to people being in the military, that we kind of get what we want, and success has always been there. If we work and try hard enough for it, you're going to get some knocks out there. Your CV may not be right. You may get filtered out. You won't get the job, but you got to keep on keeping on. And I've overused it, so forgive me, but looking for a job really is a full-time job. And you've got to be prepared just to keep that drive going. So yeah, keep the faith, I think, is probably what I'd say.
Fantastic, thank you. And last but not least, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, back to the sort of education bit and what you need to do to find your job. A lot of people that leave the military tend to go into, management consultancy, banking, recruitment, HR, all those sort of ones that everyone seems to pull to. But our experiences are much wider than that, guys. So keep your horizons open and don't feel that you've got to do like every other person that has done and spent 2 years, running a desk in Barclays only to go, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Find out about where you want to do the research, do the networking, find out. A good friend of mine left the army having spent 6 months speaking in coffee shops to people in JP Morgan and banking organizations, didn't have a clue about banking himself. 10 years later, he's one of the executive directors in JP Morgan. Yes, he worked for it, but the point is he did all his research up front and then worked out where he wanted to go. Don't just go for the first job you're offered. Do that research up front, work out where you want to go, where you think you'll fit, and you 9 times out of 10 will. Otherwise, I think it's throwing a lot of darts at the dartboard and hoping to hit a bullseye.
Fantastic, thank you, and a great point. Research and networking, I think, are the two takeaways from that final point. So we're going to go into a 10-minute comfort break now, and when we come back, Esme will be taking you through the rest of the day. All that's left for me to do is to thank our speakers, to Andrew, to Ollie, Tom, Francis and Stephen for joining us this afternoon. And also the rest of the speakers that I've been working with over the last couple of hours. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and get in touch if you feel that I can support you in any way. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. I know that we've still got plenty going on, and I hope to speak to you all again soon. Thank you.